So welcome everyone. This is the Intro to Consulting presentation run by DACC. Most of our e-board is here today, and we're a club on campus for advanced professional degrees, candidate students, and really we're here to introduce people to consulting and get them into that industry. So let's see. I want to get started just talking a little bit about the agenda for today. So for today's agenda, we're going to go through a little bit about what is consulting, introduce you to concepts and words you will hear a lot about. Then we're going to talk about what you need to do to apply and end up in a consulting role. And then we'll wrap up with how is DACC positioned to help you guys? What can we do to prepare you in the process? And after that presentation, we'll go into a Q&A with all the e-board members and alumni from DACC that are here. So I'm going to wait to present and introduce everyone until after the presentation so that all of what that they say hopefully becomes a little bit more relevant. So that you know all those words. Cool. So let's get started with that. First, what is consulting? And here we're going to take a look at first the perspective from the clients, like what does consulting work try to accomplish for clients? And then who are the consultants that do that work? We'll dive into a little bit about the career path as a consultant, and maybe have a little bit of a discussion about post-pandemic consulting if we have time. Now I know we're running, we're going to be pretty tight on the presentation side. I want to give as much time as possible for the Q&A. So what do the clients actually pay for in consulting? And first, to even be able to answer that, we should probably step back and say, well, who is this firm and who are the clients? Right. So in consulting, essentially the two huge stakeholders that we have is the firm and then the firm's clients. The firm is some consulting firm. So this might be McKinsey and Company or BCG, companies like this, who acquire clients, which are usually other businesses who have some form of business problem. And so what those clients, let's say that it's Coca-Cola or Volvo, they have some business problem that they want solved. And typically the business problems that they go to consultants for is outside the scope of that business's main competency. So they're not going to go to a consulting company and say, oh, we're really struggling to develop our next year's car. Can you do it for us? Because that's in their competency if they're Volvo. But rather they would go and say, hey, we have this huge problem, or we have this big problem that we're trying to deal with in a very specific part of our manufacturing process. Or they might say, we want to expand into a new market. We want to go into Asia and really break into this market better. How can we build a plan to do that and accomplish that goal? And so why are consulting companies and consulting firms better positioned to help them with these types of problems? And really, that's what the clients are paying for. They're paying for the expertise, right? So why is it that consulting companies have this expertise? Consulting companies work with a large range of different companies, and they have worked with a large range of companies for a long time. So they've collected a lot of best practices on certain types of problems. They know what the competitors are doing, things like that. And so these set of best practices is part of what clients sort of pay for. It's to check their work on, hey, we have, or it could be to check their work in that they have some plan and they want to make sure that that plan is sound. So they hire consultants to come in and help with the strategy. They also, likewise, with the best practices, consulting firms come with a lot of data at their disposal. And so these companies might be looking at consulting companies for, hey, are there any insights that you guys have about the industry or how things are moving and trends that might help influence the business decisions that we're making? And then in doing all of this, the client also expects some form of secrecy, right? So in certain situations, it might be that the management pays for consultants and then uses a lot of the work that consultants derive as the big talking points for their accomplished success at the company. And so really, it's about solving business problems. And that's what the clients are paying for. And it's something that's outside of the business's main competency. So consultants can be involved in projects at literally any stage of a project. Things can range everywhere from investigating potential problems without knowing if there are any, all the way down to having implemented a full project and then doing follow-up on that project. Consultants can either be part of that entire process or just some section of it, right? So a company might bring in consultants just to investigate, hey, are there issues in our production process? Or is there some efficiency that we can find there? And it's this open question where the consultants have to do some investigation, data collection, and analysis to figure out whether or not that is the case. But it could, and then, you know, that project could end there, and consultant, they could say, okay, thank you for your work, we got it from here. Or it could be that they have a fully fledged idea for something that they want implemented, but they don't have the expertise to do it, right? And so in implementation, they might ask a consulting firm to come in and help guide through that implementation. Now, you might, yeah, so for these parts of the investigation, really, we're talking about, you know, figuring out the root causes of a problem. Whereas in the later stages, analysis, for example, you might be looking at, you might be trying to do analysis on existing data for whether it's some market entrance that you want to do or profitability. And then in the implementation, we're looking at how to bring those recommendations or the outcomes from the analysis into reality. So one good example of this that is public is that BCG famously built Starbucks's app. So if you've ever used the Starbucks app to order food, that was something that BCG helped implement. Now, I also want to point out that there are a lot of different types of consulting firms. There are, you know, typically, and what people will talk about a lot when they come to us, our club, they'll talk about the big three, MBB, and that's McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, right? But there's a ton more consulting firms out there. There are a lot of boutique firms that are smaller. There are specialized firms that will focus only on healthcare or only on XYZ. And so as you're thinking about transitioning into consulting, that's something to definitely look into, is if you have some specific interest area, if it's not just, you know, broad strategy and management, then you should be looking out for what firms exist that do the types of things that I'm interested in. And so that brings us to who are the consultants. So, you know, consultants really range in experience and background. And common question we get is like, what types of degrees do you need to become a consultant? Do you need an engineering degree? Do you need a business degree? And almost any degree is fine. Really what they care about is that you're intelligent, that you understand business problems, that you can have some structured thinking. And we'll talk about what skills you need in a couple seconds. And then I will point out, though, that while the degree doesn't matter so much, there does seem to be some weighting on schools. And this is purely because of the pipelines that lead into some of these companies. And so looking at, you know, some of the top companies here, I have McKinsey and BCG pulled up. Duke really has very strong pipelines into these top firms through club efforts, but also through intentional recruiting by the firms. Now, I will say that the top three, or MBB, they have no official preference for schools, But if you look at the breakdown by alma mater, Duke University ranks very highly. So there's a lot of Duke alum at these firms. And so what sort of skills do you need to be a good consultant? Like, why is it that they're getting a lot of consultants from Duke? Generally, the types of things that will make you a successful consultant are being a very strong communicator. Communication is a huge part of an engagement with a client. If you do all the perfect analysis in the world, but can't communicate that succinctly and well, then you're not going to do well with client engagements. But it is really important to have that analytical thinking. An analysis will be a core function of the job as a consultant. It's thinking about problems that you haven't seen before and how to apply knowledge that you have seen before to new problems. It'll be really beneficial to be able to read technical and dense reports, which, as professional or advanced degree students, that's something that our background or our training helps us with. And then two more things that are really important. One is understanding of finances. You have to have some form of intuition for how business works. You have to understand how your client makes money. Because everything that you recommend, everything that you do, and the analysis that you look at is going to lead to making recommendations that will impact that number. And probably most important of all, you have to be able to learn very, very quickly. Consulting is all about, you have to become the expert on certain topics very quickly, be able to familiarize yourself with new information, bring yourself up to speed with a totally unique industry that you've never worked with before. These are all really important things in consultant. And then looking as just a pathway of your career as a consultant, here are, again, those two companies. I don't want to focus just on these companies for the presentation, but the data is very readily available for them. So typically, the progression here goes from, and I'll follow the McKinsey language for just a second, goes from business analyst into associate, then engagement manager and associate, then you become forms of partners. And so I'll break down just what each of these are. So as a business analyst, you perform sort of a supporting role to teams that are working with clients. You might do a lot of analysis and create slide decks and generally serve as a supporting role for the work that they're doing. Associates are those people on the team. So you'll have a group of associates led by an engagement manager, so the next step up. And these associates do the grunt work of figuring out, how to frame the problem, how to investigate the problem, how to create recommendations, and how to communicate that effectively. The engagement manager then helps lead the full engagement. They're sort of the leader within the local team. And they'll lead a lot of the interaction with the clients. They'll also be a little bit more in charge of the feedback back to you, although it's generally in consulting firms expected that feedback is shared in all directions. And after that, we reach partner levels. And partner levels is when you start to, you're the person that's bringing in clients. And really, promotions there start to be much more about how many clients you're able to bring in and how vast your network is, that sort of thing. I'll mention a few points on this sort of scale. One is that many top firms generally have an up or out policy. So this means that every 2 years, there is some form of review cycle where they look at your performance, and if you've met some bar, you performed really well, then you'll be promoted into this next level. But if you haven't, then in many cases, people talk about being pushed out of these firms. Now, being pushed out of one of these firms generally isn't such a bad thing. The exit opportunities are often extremely lucrative. With names like Sheryl Sandberg or Sundar Pichai, right? Like these are all people that used to be in consulting firms. And so generally, even if you don't get pushed out, it might be the case that you just get offers that are so much more lucrative than staying in consulting that you end up leaving on your own before the review cycle. I'll also mention that there are totally different tracks in this. This is like the classic track for a strategy consulting role at top firms. But if you're doing things like if you're more interested in data science or being in supporting roles, there are definitely other jobs at these firms, right? Like McKinsey needs, for example, lawyers just generally. They don't just need lawyers to work on client engagements. And so there are a bunch of other roles there, although those jobs generally hire in a more traditional way. And one last note, I know I'm totally not going in order here, but the entrance point for PhD candidates and MBA, or those with a PhD and those with an MBA, would be right at the associates level. So you skip business analyst in the case of McKinsey and jump in there. All right. So how do you prepare for this whole mess? What can you do to have a strong application? We'll talk about the components of that application on the next slide, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into the case interview. Case interview is this very special concept in consulting, and very different from other interviews. And then we will share just a bit of a recommended timeline. This is what we've worked with in this club for the past 12 years. It's been updated a little bit because the application deadlines have sort of crept all the way up to the beginning of summer, slowly but surely across those years. So what are the components of a successful application? Really, we like to follow this track of, first, you got to build your resume. So this is just classic gathering experience. Part of what you're doing with that is your research if you're a PhD student, or whatever other things you're doing, if you have a job on the side or things like this. Building up your resume, getting enough experience to feel that you have some technical expertise and ability to build the skills that we talked about earlier. And then you take that resume and try to build some form of personal story that makes sense. Why do you want to go into consulting? Why is it that you spent all this time becoming a PhD and now you know how to do neurobiology research, let's say. Why is it that you don't want to continue that? Why now shift into consulting? So you want to have a good answer to that and be able to spin your story. This is all about the elevator pitch, that sort of thing. And then the next step is the case prep. So preparing for this case interview that I mentioned earlier. The case interview we'll talk about on the next slide in a little bit more detail, but it's a form of interview that you want to prepare for and practice many times before you do it. It's good to then network, try to find people at firms to both find out what's a good fit for you, but also for references and that sort of thing. And then you go through the application process, and that will generally be your resume, and you do that through the companies directly. After you've applied, you'll be invited for a series of interviews. That all handles itself, and it's different for every firm. But generally, it'll be some combination of this case interview and then also a fit interview. So the fit interview will be more of a traditional interview where they ask you about your experience and just try to make sure that you're a good cultural fit for the company. And so before we dive into the timeline for this, I want to first just talk about the case interview a little bit. And I'm not going to dive super deep on this. The case interview is a real beast of its own. And so, you know, part of what we do at DACC is help you with this, but we'll get into that as well later. So the case interview is this, you know, this tool that consulting firms use to better understand if you have the skills the skill sets to be able to apply or break down a problem, figure out how to find a solution to that problem, and give some form of recommendation very quickly. And it really is all about measuring whether or not you can think in a highly structured way and if you're an effective communicator in that thinking. And so here are some examples. These are very short examples. Generally, you'll be given more information, and the questions will be you know, a series of questions. But it'll be things like you know, Coca-Cola, their profits are declining in recent years. They'll give you some data about how those profits are declining and some hints as to why that might be. And then your job in the case interview is, can you help find the root cause of that profit decline? And so you'll start asking questions. You'll propose some form of framework for investigating this problem. You'll ask your interviewer for more information, and they'll reveal it as the time goes on. And then in the end, you'll give some form of recommendation and talk. And there's different ways that you can do these case interviews, all of which you can learn from our training program. So I won't go too much more into detail, but I'll go back to what do you need for a successful application, and what's the timeline really that we're talking about. So right now we're in September. When should you be starting to apply? But even when should you start this case prep that we talked about? When should you start to network with people? And this is generally the timeline that we work with. Now, you know, this is going to vary. There are different ways to accomplish this, but we're somewhere in September, so midway through semester 1 of fall. And we're right starting up on when you should look into starting case preparation if you're graduating in the cycle that is shown here. So really, we're talking about a graduation in, yeah, so let's say it's 2030, right, is when you're graduating. Then in so essentially the summer before, so 2029, but shortly, so 2 years before. But anyway, you should you should start your resume building personal story, although this is something we always work on. You begin your case preparation and your networking shortly after that, networking in the spring sometime, leading up to it and ramping up. All of these sort of ramp up as you get closer to interviews. You submit your applications, wait for your interviews, and then the case preparation obviously will fall back as soon as interviews start. That interview cycle is going to take a lot of time and thinking. Offers come out, and there's a big range here, right? Where the interviews land and where the offers come out. And this is just because companies do it at different rates. But at DACC, we have all of these dates. We share them with people, and so you won't miss when the applications are due. But yeah, so the applications for MBB generally tend to be towards the beginning of the summer. All right, a lot of talking, a little bit more talking, and then we'll get into Q&A and introducing everyone. But first, we should just talk about who we are and why we're giving this presentation. So we're DACC, Duke Advanced Degree Consulting Club. We have some core initiatives, and essentially our mission is just to help people get into consulting. We'll walk through what those initiatives are in a second, our e-board structure, and how you can get involved with the club. So I have this slide here. I'll throw it on at the end as well, but if you want to screenshot it, I'll leave it up for like 4 more seconds. Okay, so we have 4 core initiatives in our club, where we break down into 4 completely different activities run by different eBoard members. So I'll just start with case practice. Case practice is linked to what we talked about earlier. This is really about helping you understand the case interview, and we'll pair you up with other club members so that you can practice cases together. We provide case books, lessons, and other materials in our Google Drive, and that runs weekly, every single week during the spring semester. And so people can come together and practice cases. Now, that's a really important part of the application process, right? We also do events like this one, but we do a lot of other events beyond just introducing you to consulting. We have featured guests. We have some panels come in and discuss specific topics, whether that's women in consulting or whether it's talking to a specific firm about what they do, and give some opportunity to network with that company. That events run, generally we have an event every single month. And so essentially join our Slack or our email list, and we'll send out notifications about when events are happening. And there's also a lot of events that other schools put on that we'll notify you of that are free to join. Then we have the pro bono services, which is a large part of our club. The pro bono services, we create an engagement with a real client, right? So we do pro bono work for real people. And these clients range from, all the way up to like Fortune 1000 companies down to startups that are, still working out of the garage. There are everything from, deep in the healthcare space to more, social networking like clients, and we've really worked for all types of businesses, and so we break you into teams just like you would be broken into teams as a consultant. You work with these clients over 8 to 10 weeks, and we do this once a semester. So the application deadline for this semester has already passed, but there will be another round of pro bono services in spring. So if that's something that interests you, those applications will come out. And then we also have this case competition that we run jointly with UNC. So essentially what we do is we launch this case competition. People join as teams themselves. So there you get to join teams together. You find your friends and join. And then you solve some case in your own time. So this won't be live like a case interview. And then present that case to a panel of judges. Usually these judges will be people at consulting firms or sometimes partners. And there will be some form of prize pool. And essentially this is an opportunity to network with other aspiring consultants. Now, that case competition is not just, the entrants are not just Duke and UNC students, but anyone in the world essentially can join these case competitions. And so it's a great opportunity to network with people from universities all over the world. All right, so that's what we do at DACC, and I'll throw, okay, maybe quickly I'll walk through the eBoard structure. So because we have these 4 initiatives, we have a very tight eBoard. We have 4 directors, 1 for each of these initiatives, and then we have 2 co-presidents overseeing the whole club. So the co-presidents work with each director on a weekly basis with whatever they're working on for the initiatives. As needed, we bring in more people. So we have engagement manager roles for the pro bono director that help, for example, this semester, Trevor is running engagements with 12 clients. And so the 8 engagement managers come in to help with some of the communication between teams and clients and make sure that everything's running smooth week to week. And for the case competition, we hire a committee to help out during the actual case competition phase. Now that's a limited time during the year. I mention this because the engagement manager and case competition committee roles regularly come up for new hiring. And so you should definitely consider, joining the club and showing us what you got and then applying for these roles if consulting is something that interests you. This is part of your building the resume and whatnot. And generally, we've been very successful at DACC. Our members have ended up basically everywhere in the consulting space. And you'll get to speak to some of these people today. So we have, Cody, our former co-president. We have Minjun, our current co-president. We have Trevor as well, who is the case competition director, the pro bono services director that I mentioned earlier. And then we also have Lily, who is a former e-board member. And so maybe we'll go through and just introduce each other. So Minjun, Cody, Trevor, and Lily, if you want to just talk about what you did with DACC, what your degree was at Duke, and how you were able to spin your personal story as you landed, whatever firm you ended up at. And if we just want to go in order, I think that makes sense. Minjun, if you want to start us off.
Sure. Yeah. So hello, everyone. My name is Minjun. I am a PhD candidate in Duke Fuqua and focusing on decision science. So I'm a 5th year. And to start with, I actually got involved with consulting like about a year ago, last year's summer, when I finished my preliminary exams. So indeed, my startup like with consulting kind of coincidence with DACC. So I joined DACC's like case practice events, as Rick has just like introduced earlier on in the summers, where I do like weekly case practice. And then like later in that, like last year's like 4th semester, I also attended a pro bono consulting program. So to get more deeply involved with those kind of clients there and get to know like what exactly consulting has been looked like and what are the field works that will be done. So later on in the spring semester this year, I attended Bain's Access to APAC program, which is a special like short, not that short in terms of Bain, which is a 3 weeks program that's specially designed for PhD students. And you get to get involved with the APAC offices at Bain, know like what they are doing, and they also like give you a lot of like network opportunities. And with that whole program being attended, then I was also gonna be given like kind of a fast track interview process, and that earns me like kind of a successful offer at Bain Shanghai office. So if anyone is kind of interested in an APAC area program and like interested in knowing like how that kind of program is designed for PhD students, so feel free to like come and ask. So I can share a little bit of like kind of my insights into that kind of experiences.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this, Rich. This is great. My name's Cody David. I graduated in May with my PhD in religion theology. So I have a little bit different background. I'm going to be joining McKinsey's Dallas office in just over 3 weeks. So start date is coming up soon, and I'm just trying to settle in now. I did a lot of things through DACC, and they were all really helpful. I worked on one of the pro bono projects, which is just a great like experience thing to put on your resume. I also was part of the case competition committee, and I would highly plug that as well, because that's a great place to network. You meet a lot of different consultants, a lot of different people in the business. I would definitely suggest doing that. And then last year, I was co-president with Rich, kind of overseeing a lot of the professional development stuff. And what was the third thing, Rich, you wanted us to talk about? How our story led us into consulting?
Yeah, and I think especially for you, how'd you end up spinning the religion degree into a consulting?
Yeah. So I found a lot of consulting firms will take people with any background, as long as you can talk about your journey and as long as you can talk about your skill set in a way that makes sense to them. So my dissertation dealt a lot with ancient economics. So that, didn't give me any skills, but it allowed me to tell my story in a way that made sense. I kind of focus on ancient economics, which got me interested in modern economics and business, which led to consulting. So that was how I told my story. And they're really looking for, analytical skills. Can you analyze data? Which I'm assuming, if you're doing an advanced degree, you just have to kind of figure out how to talk about that. I found that talking about, they like pattern recognition. So if you can kind of talk about like pattern recognition within data, that was how I talked about mine. And also communication, right? So if you're teaching, if you're working on a pro bono consulting project, if you're working on the case competition, if you're a part of some kind of sub organization in your school, those are all really helpful too.
Nice, Cody. Very interesting. So hi, everyone. I'm Trevor Ross. I'm the Pro Bono Consulting Director here. I'm leading a bunch of projects. Please reach out if you have any questions. Happy to answer anything. Currently, I'm serving as a senior consultant at West Monroe. I'm a private equity consultant, basically serving as an AI and analytics advisor for private equity firms. A little background there. When they look to buy a target company, I go in and look under the hood, make sure the analytics are sound, make sure they actually have AI. A lot of times they lie about that. Prior to that, I was at KPMG as a data strategy consultant, and that's not like strategy like M&A, but more strategy along, you have data, here's what you should do with it, here's what you can do with it, and here's where to go. Currently, I'm a part-time online student for the quantitative management degree within Fuqua. It's pretty easy to balance, but every once in a while, there's one of those stressful weeks, as you guys all probably know. Prior to that, I was at University of Florida getting my bachelor in industrial and systems engineering, which led me to data science. And I kind of got thrust into a position at a startup where I was leading and managing a startup as a new hire, which was quite the experience. But that brought me to kind of develop my skill set, both analytically, but also kind of consulting and being more of a business communicator. And applying both those skill sets is really, really key, being able to convey really technical concepts to clients or representatives that may not be able to understand them in the way that you do. So conveying them in a digestible, understandable manner, and bubbling up the key themes and saying, here's what it means to your business, here's the impact. So being able to speak to those types of concepts and then applying my data science capabilities kind of brought me to where I am today.
Hi everyone, I'm Lily. I'm a 5th year PhD student in mechanical engineering and material science. I started to join the club when I was 1st year in my program, so basically 4 years ago, and I've done 2 pro bono projects. I've also participated in the case practice program. Last year, I was part of the, early this year, not last year, I was part of the case competition preparation team. What are other things? I think that's it. So a lot of interesting things involved in this club, and I definitely recommend everyone who is interested in consulting join the club, participate in the pro bono projects, help you to accumulate business knowledge and help you practice communicating with other people who you've never know. And in terms of the journey for consulting, I accepted an offer from IQVIA for their consulting strategy consulting branch. Maybe someone know IQVIA. We have an IQVIA office at Durham here, but it's not for consulting. But it's mainly for life science technologies and R&D. If anyone who is interested in biotechnologies and also consulting, feel free to contact me. I also have experiences participating in a lot of summer programs for PhD students, including Bain Advantage, LinkedIn, UK, and all sorts of life science firms. If you have questions regarding that, also feel free to contact me. Happy to share about my experience.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thank you all for sharing the story. So what we're gonna do next is we're just gonna create 4 breakout rooms and let everyone join to talk to each of these people. You know, if you have questions that are specific to either these firms or, you know, how to spin your own story, maybe you have a similar degree to one of these people, then go into that room and ask some questions. It'll just be open Q&A and you guys can run it as you want in those rooms. Before I go into the rooms, I'll just put this back up. This is how to get involved with our club. So please join our Slack. That is open for everyone to join. We post announcements about events and you know, deadlines for application to various things. And then the email listserv, you know, contains the same information, but you know, just in email if you prefer not checking a Slack channel all the time. We do all of our internal communication, you know, like actually communicating on Slack. So all of the pro bono engagements, for example, they do their communication on Slack.